This is Earth911. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're back with another innovator interview on sustainability in your ear, the Earth911 podcast. And we are really fortunate today to be joined by Joe Pickard, who is the Chief Economist and Director of Commodities for the Institute for Scrap Recycling Industries. That's the lobbying and regulatory group that oversees the recycling industry in the United States. And by the way, Earth911 is a member of ISRI, just for disclosure purposes. Joe, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So you all have released your biannual economic report on the state of the recycling industry just in the last month. And what I wanted to start off is just how's the industry doing in general? Are we growing? Are we seeing progress? And how big is it?
Sure, that's great questions. So just for background, we do an economic impact analysis that we have updated every year. We contract with an outside economic consultancy, John Benham and Associates, to help us conduct a study. Mm-hmm. The 2019 version of the study has come back and shown that the economic impact of the scrap recycling industry overall is $110 billion currently. That's billion with the B, mm-hmm. And that our industry currently employs directly and indirectly over 530,000 people. In addition to that, the study shows that our industry generates over $12.9 billion in federal and local taxes currently. And I think the study really reinforces the truth that the scrap recycling industry is an extremely resilient industry. And actually, the number of jobs that are directly supported by the industry came in at a little over 164,000 jobs. And that's actually 5% more than the number of directly supported jobs from the last study in 2017.
So what we're seeing is job growth that is certainly above the national growth level. The economy is growing at between 2 and 2.5%, according to a recent analysis. This is in the face of a lot of challenges, particularly internationally. China banned the import of American scrap and many recyclables because of contamination last year, and the industry has been reacting to that. How's that reaction going? It's obvious that we're recycling, but are we recycling more, and are we exporting? Still exporting?
Right. So, I mean, there's certainly been a lot of attention focused on China, and rightly so. They're a huge market. But I think it's important for your listeners to understand that, of the material that gets recycled here in the United States, that gets processed here, about 70% of all that material gets consumed domestically as well by U.S. manufacturers, including steel mills and paper mills, foundries, and smelters. In 2018, actually, ISRI estimates that the industry processed 138 million metric tons of all scrap recyclables, including metals, paper, plastics, electronics, tire and rubber, for example.
And how much growth does that represent?
Right. So that 138 million tons last year is actually an increase of 3% as compared to just 2017. Mm-hmm. So it's not terribly surprising. As our industry continues to invest in new equipment and technology, and as we continue to process more material, not surprising that our industry would actually be directly employing more people as a result.
One of the things that we hear a lot is that certain materials aren't being accepted as much anymore. But this really, as we've looked at it, seems to be simply a reaction to the changes in expectations about quality of the materials after they're sorted. And now we're seeing a reaction and investment to solve that problem so that we're doing a better job of cleaning and preparing things so that they can be used as raw material again by another manufacturer. Is that where the investment in the industry is focused right now?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Again, going back to China just a little bit, a lot of attention has been focused on the trade restrictions that China has put into place on the importation of recyclables into China. And I think that kind of accelerated some of the underlying trends that were already taking place within the scrap recycling industry. And one of the most important of those trends has been increased emphasis on producing highly consistent, high quality products for the consumers of recyclables. And I think the investment that we're seeing today is going to ensure that those quality levels continue to go up into the future.
So in terms of growth generally, what is ISRI projecting for the next few years? Or is it such a chaotic time that it's difficult to make those projections?
Right. So, I mean, certainly the industry has been in a period of transition as we adapt to changing consumer demands, both within China but around the world as well. But, we'd like to emphasize that the scrap recycling industry in the United States was extremely vibrant and economically viable well before China came on the stage. And I think that our industry is going to be extremely viable and vibrant going forward as well, even as Chinese demand for recyclables continues to diminish. So certainly we're seeing expectations for continued growth going forward. As with any industry that is intricately tied to commodity markets, there's intrinsically going to be some volatility in those markets and periods of adjustment as global demand factors shift. But our industry is extremely adaptive to market changes, and I think that bodes well for the future of the industry going forward.
And let's talk about another element of that continued evolution of the industry, and it's the ISRI Scrap Specifications Working Group, which you are leading along with a member of the organization. You're redefining the specifications for what's accepted. Tell us about how that might contribute to greater efficiency, to making more things recyclable. What's the outlook for consumers thinking about, will I be able to recycle more in the future?
I'm glad you asked that. So, we do have the Specifications Working Group that's headed by the chairman of that group, which is an ISRI member, Randy Goodman from Greenland, America. I serve as the ISRI staff liaison to that working group. Basically, just for background purposes, ISRI specifications provide the guidelines for buyers and sellers to begin negotiations about what scrap commodities they want to trade. So really, they're the starting point for negotiations and provide guidelines for the whole range of scrap recyclables, from the metal to paper to plastics to electronics, and most recently inbound MRF specifications. And ISRI works very hard to ensure that our specifications accurately reflect what's actually being traded in the marketplace today. And by doing so, we want to ensure that they help facilitate trade between buyers and sellers of scrap, whether that's here in the United States or around the world. And part of the rationale for that is not only to promote business and trade, but by doing so, we also help ensure that the full economic and environmental benefits associated with recycling are captured, because it's critical that the scrap recyclables actually get to the consumers who need them. And by facilitating that trade, our ISRI specifications also help to capture the environmental benefits, whether it's reduced greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's sending less material to landfills, whether it's reducing the need to mine for new ore or virgin materials. All of those environmental and, in addition to that, economic benefits are only fully captured when trading of the materials takes place. And I think that ISRI specifications help to facilitate that trade, and we're working hard to make sure that they continue to do that, and that those trading networks are expanded going into the future.
And in part of that work, are you adding new materials that will be recycled? That's always a question that we get, is what about all this new stuff that's being invented? Will it be recyclable? How do you all address that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of the changes to the specifications, we are adding new specifications frequently. We're also modifying existing specifications, and in some cases, we're deleting specifications for commodities that really aren't being traded currently. But because scrap recyclers are constantly seeing the flow of materials that are coming through their gates changing, whether that's new alloys, whether that's new consumer products, whether that's new packaging, our specifications are designed to adapt to that changing marketplace as well.
Can you give us an example of a couple of things that have been added recently that people might be looking forward to seeing more recycling because it's now part of the specification?
Sure, absolutely. We've made specification changes to a whole bunch of different commodity groups in recent years, including in the plastics space, adding the specifications for PVC and actually for plastic car bumpers, which are increasingly being recycled. We've added guidelines for inbound materials coming into the MRFs to promote best practices and also generally accepted guidelines for what materials MRFs are looking for. We've also updated our specifications on non-ferrous scrap metals to reflect higher quality standards and the changing marketplace for those materials as well.
So it's fascinating to hear that you are adding new materials all the time. What about, let's just turn quickly to the people working in these environments. What are the kinds of skills that they're going to need in the future? Are these jobs for somebody who knows how to turn a wrench and drive a truck, or are you going to need higher level skills, or is it a combination of both?
I would say all of the above. Certainly the industry continues to invest in new technology and new equipment that is going to require higher skill sets. But basically, for most scrap processing facilities, labor market conditions remain extremely tight. If you look at the situation nationally, our unemployment rate is extremely low at 3.7%, which means that there's a lot of competition within the marketplace for good quality employees that firms can hire and retain. And so as a result, scrap recyclers have also been raising wages and benefits for their employees in order to attract and retain the highest quality talent. And interestingly, from the Dunham report that was just recently released, that shows that in the United States, the average job within the scrap recycling industry pays an average $73,000 in wages and benefits here in the U.S. And that's the average for the industry. So these are extremely well-paying, competitive jobs. And I think we're going to continue to see growth in terms of recycling industry employment going forward.
Yeah, we certainly live in the midst of a mine full of stuff that we've thrown away and can reuse. There's no doubt about that. So it's good to know that the jobs are starting to, the jobs are a solid middle-class position that you can build a career on. That's fantastic. Well, Joe, thank you for bringing this information to the Earth911 audience. Thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, folks, that's Joe Pickard, who is the ISRI Director of Commodities and Chief Economist. And this is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. Thanks, folks.